I never thought my peaceful retirement as a state senator would end with an HOA president trying to steal the home I'd lived in for 50 years through a massive fraud scheme. But when they destroyed my late husband's memorial bench and tried bulldozing my tulip garden at midnight, I had to ask myself, what would happen if they realized they'd just messed with the wrong person? Welcome, and please subscribe for more HOA stories. The banging on my front door jolted me awake at exactly 7 a.m. I was already exhausted from last night's late city budget meeting, but clearly someone had other plans for my Sunday morning. Opening the door, I found Linda Crawford, our new HOA president, tapping her foot with that familiar look of disapproval. "Senator Carter, your tulips are 3 inches taller than the regulation height," she announced, waving her measuring tape like a weapon. "This is your 4th violation this month." I looked past her at my husband Mark's beloved garden, the one thing I'd promised to keep alive after cancer took him last year. Every morning for 49 years, he'd tend to those flowers while I had my coffee on the porch. Now, apparently, they were a crime against the neighborhood. "Linda," I said calmly, "those tulips have been here since 1972. The HOA didn't even exist until 1990. She pushed her designer sunglasses up her nose and handed me a folded paper. "New bylaws were passed last month. You should attend meetings if you want a say in things. Being a senator doesn't make you special here." I bit back the response about how I'd missed the meeting because I was dealing with a state emergency. Instead, I watched her march across my lawn, measuring tape still in hand, to scold Mr. Jenkins about his non-compliant mailbox color. That afternoon, while sorting through my mail, I found something strange. A letter addressed to current resident instead of me. Inside was an eviction notice, claiming I had 30 days to vacate the property. My hand started shaking. This had to be a mistake. I called Mr. Jenkins, my neighbor of 30 years who'd served on the original HOA board. "Hey, did you get any weird mail today?" I asked. "Thank goodness you called," he said urgently. "I just saw your house listed for sale on Zillow, posted this morning." My stomach dropped. "That's impossible. I own this place outright." "Well, somebody doesn't think so," he replied. "The listing agent is Crawford Realty Group." Linda Crawford. The pieces started falling into place. The harassment over my flowers, the sudden new bylaws, the eviction notice. This wasn't about landscaping. It was about theft. I spent the next hour digging through my home office, searching for the original deed. When I finally found it in Mark's old filing box, another document slipped out, a handwritten letter from him that I'd never seen before. "My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, something's gone wrong with the house. Check under the 3rd tulip from the left. I buried a waterproof box with copies of all our important papers. You always teased me for being too cautious, but I had a feeling we'd need them someday." Even after he was gone, Mark was still protecting our home. I grabbed a shovel and went straight to the garden, not caring that I was still in my work clothes from yesterday. As I dug beneath his favorite tulip, I heard Linda's voice drifting over from next door. "Of course it's legal," she was saying on her phone. "The digital transition mixed up some ownership records. We're just correcting them. By the time anyone figures it out, the sale will be final." She laughed. "Even a senator can't fight City Hall." My shovel hit something hard. Inside the metal box, I found exactly what I needed. Our original deed, property surveys, and every HOA document we'd ever signed, including one from 1990 that specifically protected our pre-existing garden. When I looked up, Linda was standing at her fence, her confident smirk faltering as she saw the box in my hands. Then she turned and hurried back toward her house, already dialing another number. The sun was setting behind my home of 50 years, long shadows stretching across the tulips. Holding those documents, I realized this wasn't just about keeping my house. How many other homes had Linda corrected during the digital transition? And more importantly, how could she forget that a senator might know a thing or two about investigating fraud? I picked up my phone and called Attorney General Miguel Torres. Miguel, remember how you said you were looking for a strong real estate fraud case? I think I just found one in my own backyard. I could hear Linda's voice again, shouting about emergency HOA meetings and shredding documents. But for the first time all day, I smiled. Mark had always said our old Victorian house had chosen us for a reason. Maybe he was right. I couldn't sleep after finding that eviction notice, so I went down to my basement where I keep all my important papers. My hands were shaking as I pulled out the old metal box Mark and I had bought when we first moved in. Inside was our original deed from 1974, the paper yellowed with age, but still perfectly readable. Next to it lay 50 years of property tax receipts, each one carefully filed by Mark. He was always the organized one. The sound of a car door slamming made me look up through the basement window. A sleek real estate agent's car had parked in front of my house. My neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, was running across his lawn in his pajamas, waving his arms and trying to stop them. I hurried upstairs and opened my front door, just in time to hear the agent say, "The open house is scheduled for this weekend." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "There must be some mistake," I said, still clutching my old deed. "I never listed my home for sale." The agent gave me a puzzled look and pulled out her tablet. According to county records, this property was just listed by the Ridgeview HOA. She turned the screen toward me, and my heart nearly stopped. There was my home, listed for $850,000, with photos I'd never seen before. I called my old friend Michael at the county records office right away. While I waited for him to check the files, I went through more of my papers. That's when I found something strange. A notice from 6 months ago about the HOA modernizing their records. Linda Crawford had made a big deal about going paperless, saying it would make everything easier. I hadn't paid much attention at the time. I was dealing with a state budget crisis. Mr. Jenkins came over with his laptop. He's good with computers, much better than me. Together we looked through the HOA's new online system, and my stomach dropped when we found my property record. According to their database, I had transferred my deed to the HOA during the digital transition. But I had never signed anything like that. "Look at this," Mr. Jenkins said, pointing to his screen. He'd found 5 other homes in our neighborhood with similar transfers, all belonging to longtime residents who had lived there for decades. Every one of them had gotten complaints from Linda Crawford about their lawns or paint colors in the past year. Just then, Michael called back. "Senator, something's not right here," he said, his voice serious. "The digital deed has a signature dated 3 months ago, but according to my records, you were giving a speech at the Capitol that day. I'm looking at the video right now." Moments later, my security team called. They had spotted someone taking pictures of my house. When they went to investigate, the person claimed to be measuring for renovation work ordered by the HOA. I hadn't approved any renovations. I was writing everything down when an email from Linda Crawford popped up on my screen. "Just a reminder that the HOA has full authority to maintain community standards. The buyers this weekend are a lovely young couple who appreciate proper lawn care, unlike some of our current residents."
The pieces were coming together, and I didn't like the picture they formed. Linda's real estate company handling all the HOA's transferred properties, the sudden surge of complaints against longtime residents, the mysterious digital transition. My years in politics taught me how to spot a scheme, and this had all the signs of one. A movement outside caught my eye, more cars pulling up in front of my house. Through the gathering darkness, I could see Linda directing people with clipboards toward my porch. When she looked up and saw me watching, she gave that same smug smile I'd seen too many times when she complained about my garden hose being visible from the street. My phone buzzed, a text from Linda Thompson, the HOA secretary. "Senator, please check your email. There's something you need to see about the records transfer, but don't let Linda know I sent it." The emergency HOA meeting was packed with worried neighbors when I walked in. I hadn't worn my usual suit today. I came in my gardening clothes, dirt still fresh on my knees from checking on Mark's tulips one last time. Linda Crawford's face turned bright red when she saw me dressed so casually. She had always hated how I kept working in my garden, even after becoming a senator. I took my seat in the front row, placing my old leather briefcase on the floor. Inside was every piece of paper proving I had owned my home since 1973. Mr. Jenkins sat beside me, giving my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. The room buzzed with whispers. No one had ever seen an emergency meeting called so suddenly. Linda Crawford stood at the podium in her fancy red blazer, tapping her manicured nails on the wood. "Senator Carter," she said, her tone dripping with disdain, "I assume you're here to discuss the property situation?" She smiled that same fake smile I'd seen too many times when she complained about my garden hose being visible from the street. "You could say that," I replied, keeping my voice steady, just as Mark had taught me during my first campaign.
"I'm here about you trying to sell my home without my permission." The room went silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Linda Crawford's smile widened, sharp and dangerous. She reached into her designer bag and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "Actually," she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness, "according to our new digital record system, you haven't owned that property since last year's database update." I stood up slowly, my knees creaking a bit. "Linda, I've lived in that house for 50 years. I have every document since 1973 right here." I patted my briefcase. "You can't just type something into a computer and make my home yours to sell." "Oh, but I can." She waved the papers triumphantly. "When we updated our systems, we found several irregularities. Your property wasn't properly registered under the new HOA guidelines. Therefore, ownership has defaulted to the association." The neighbors began to murmur. Mrs. Rodriguez from across the street stood up. "That's ridiculous. Senator Carter has lived there longer than anyone." Linda banged her gavel. "The rules are the rules. If you don't properly register your property during a system update, you forfeit your rights. It's all in Section 47B of the new bylaws." That's when I smiled and reached into my briefcase. "Interesting you mention those new bylaws, Linda. I have here the original HOA agreement from 1980. It clearly states that any changes to registration requirements must be approved by a 75% vote of homeowners." I pulled out another paper. "And look what I found in the county records. No such vote ever took place." Linda's face went pale. She shuffled through her papers, flipping faster and faster. That's not relevant. The digital transition supersedes the law." A deep voice from the back interrupted her. "Does it now?"
Everyone turned. Michael Torres, my old friend and the Attorney General, stood up, because I'd be very interested to hear how a computer database supersedes 50 years of legal property records. Linda's hands began to tremble. "This meeting is adjourned," she shouted, grabbing her papers. But in her hurry, one sheet fluttered to the floor. Mr. Jenkins picked it up before she could snatch it back. "Hey," he said, his voice rising, "this is a sale contract dated 3 months ago. You've been trying to sell Senator Carter's house since January." The room erupted in chaos. Neighbors shouted, demanding answers. Linda backed away from the podium, frantically typing on her phone. Later, we'd find out she was trying to delete emails, but she didn't realize Linda Thompson had already backed them up. "Linda," I said, my voice cutting through the noise, "I think you should know I just signed an executive order this morning creating a state task force on housing fraud. Would you like to guess who's leading it?" She bolted for the door, her high heels clicking against the tile. But Michael Torres was faster, and 2 police officers were already waiting in the lobby. Her designer bag hit the floor, scattering papers everywhere. Those papers would soon lead us down a rabbit hole none of us expected. Mr. Jenkins picked up the gavel Linda had dropped. "I move for an immediate vote to remove Linda Crawford as HOA president," he declared. "All in favor?" Every hand in the room shot up. But somehow, I knew this was just the beginning. Later that night, I sat in my study, staring at the growing wall of evidence we'd gathered against Linda Crawford. Something still didn't add up. The paper trail was too sloppy for someone as careful as her. That's when a knock came at the door. It was Linda Thompson, our HOA secretary of 15 years. Her eyes were red from crying, and her hands trembled as she held out a small USB drive. "Senator Carter, I can't sleep anymore," she whispered, closing the door behind her. My security team swept the USB before I plugged it in. When I finally opened the files, my blood ran cold. Spreadsheets, property records, fake documents, all meticulously organized by date and neighborhood. Linda Crawford hadn't just altered my property record. She'd been slowly taking over homes throughout the entire county. I called Mr. Jenkins, who lived next to 3 houses Linda's company had acquired. He came over immediately, bringing his daughter, Emily Jenkins, a data analyst who'd been suspicious about the neighborhood's property records for months. "Look at this pattern," Emily said, pointing to her laptop. "Every target is either elderly, too busy to notice the paperwork changes, or living out of state. Linda's company swoops in, claims there are HOA violations, and then suddenly discovers ownership problems." Linda Thompson's hands shook as she opened more files. "I started keeping copies when she first joined the HOA board 5 years ago. At first, it was little things, missing meeting minutes, deleted complaints from certain homeowners. Then I started noticing property documents disappearing from the archive." Mr. Jenkins began pacing, his face red. "Remember the Andersons? They lived here 40 years. Linda claimed they'd agreed to sell because of HOA violations. They moved to Florida last year, heartbroken." I picked up my phone, but Linda Thompson grabbed my arm. "Wait," she said, her voice breaking. "There's more. Linda has a whole network, real estate agents, contractors, even someone inside the county records office."
I'm here about you trying to sell my home without my permission. The room fell silent. You could hear the air conditioner humming. Linda Crawford's smile widened, sharp and dangerous. She pulled a thick stack of papers from her designer bag. "Actually,"
she said. "According to our new digital record system, you haven't owned that property since last year's database update." I rose slowly, my knees creaking. "Linda, I've lived in that house for 50 years. I have every document since 1973 right here." I patted my briefcase. "You can't just type something into a computer and make my home yours to sell." "Oh, but I can," she waved the papers. "When we updated our systems, we found several irregularities. Your property wasn't properly registered under the new HOA guidelines. Therefore, ownership has defaulted to the association." The neighbors started muttering. Mrs. Rodriguez from across the street stood up. "That's ridiculous! Emily's lived there longer than anyone." Linda banged her gavel. "The rules are the rules. If you don't properly register your property during a system update, you forfeit your rights. It's all in Section 47B of the new bylaws." That's when I smiled and reached into my briefcase. "Interesting you mention those new bylaws, Linda. I have here the original HOA agreement from 1980. It clearly states that any changes to registration requirements must be approved by a 75% vote of homeowners." I pulled out another paper. "And look what I found in the county records. No such vote ever happened." Linda's face went pale. She shuffled through her papers. That's not relevant. The digital transition supersedes the law." A deep voice came from the back. "Supersedes the law?" Michael Torres, my old friend and the Attorney General, stood up. "I'd be very interested in hearing how a computer database overrides 50 years of legal property records." Linda's hands trembled. "This meeting is adjourned." She grabbed her papers, but one slipped to the floor. Mr. Jenkins snatched it up before she could. "Hey, this is a sale contract, dated 3 months ago. You've been trying to sell Senator Carter's house since January." The room erupted. Linda backed away from the podium as neighbors shouted questions. Through the chaos, I watched her pull out her phone, frantically typing. Later, we'd learn she was deleting emails, unaware that backups already existed. "Linda," I said, my voice cutting through the noise, "you should know. I just signed an executive order this morning, creating a state task force on housing fraud. Would you like to guess who's leading it?" She ran for the door, high heels clicking on the tile floor. But Michael was faster, and 2 officers were already waiting in the lobby. Her designer bag hit the ground, spilling more papers. Papers that would lead us down a rabbit hole none of us expected. Mr. Jenkins picked up the gavel Linda had left behind. "I move for an immediate vote to remove Linda Crawford as HOA president." Every hand shot up. But I knew this was only the beginning.
Later that night, I sat in my study, surrounded by walls of evidence. Something didn't add up. The trail was too messy for someone as careful as Linda. That's when our HOA secretary of 15 years, Linda Thompson, knocked on my door. Tears in her eyes, a USB drive in her shaking hand. "Senator Carter," she whispered, closing the door, "I can't sleep at night anymore. Linda didn't just target your home. There's so much more." My security team swept the drive before I plugged it in. What we found made my blood run cold. Spreadsheets, forged deeds, fake records, all meticulously organized by date and neighborhood.
Linda hadn't just altered my property data. She'd been quietly taking over homes across the entire county. I called Mr. Jenkins, who lived next to 3 empty houses recently acquired by Linda's company. He came right over, bringing his daughter, Mark, a data analyst who'd been suspicious for months. "Look at this pattern," Mark said, pointing to his laptop. "Every target is either elderly, too busy to notice, or living out of state. Linda's company claims HOA violations, then suddenly discovers ownership issues." Linda Thompson's hands shook as she opened more files. "I started keeping records 5 years ago when she joined the board. First it was small, meeting minutes altered, complaints disappearing. Then property files started going missing." Mr. Jenkins paced the room, red-faced. "Remember the Andersons? Lived here 40 years. She claimed they sold due to HOA violations. They left for Florida, heartbroken." I reached for my phone, but Linda Thompson grabbed my arm. "Wait, there's more. She's got a network. Realtors, contractors, even someone at the county records office. They're all in on it." Mark scrolled to another document, a list of future targets. 30 more homes in our neighborhood alone. Each address had notes on the owner's vulnerabilities. Next to my name, "Too busy with Senate duties to notice changes. Husband deceased. Emotional attachment to property makes legal challenge unlikely." They'd studied us, our lives, our weaknesses. Linda hadn't targeted my rose garden because it broke HOA rules. She'd done it because she knew it would distract me with grief while she stole my home. Emails revealed her next move. She planned to accuse more residents of failing to transfer their deeds during the digital transition, a harmless clerical fix, she'd call it. But Mark had already checked. None of it was legal. "She's built an entire shadow system," Mark said, "fake documents that look real. She's counting on no one checking the actual county records." As we dug deeper, Mr. Jenkins noticed something chilling. Every attempted takeover aligned with major state events, when I'd be too busy to notice local issues. That's when I finally understood. Linda wasn't just stealing homes. She was building an empire, one house at a time. Linda Thompson straightened, her fear replaced with fury. "I have everything, Senator. Every email, every forged document, every secret meeting recording. I've been saving them for years, waiting for someone strong enough to take her down." I looked at them. Linda's determination, Mr. Jenkins's righteous anger, and Mark's analytical focus. Linda Crawford might have money and influence, but we had truth and unity. And she was about to learn that messing with people's homes was a dangerous game, especially when one of those people had the full power of the Senate behind her. Just then, Mark's laptop pinged, a new alert. Linda had called an emergency HOA meeting tomorrow night. We exchanged looks. This was it. The time for gathering evidence was over. Now we had to decide, would we spring our trap, or was Linda about to spring hers? I was getting ready for bed when my phone buzzed. Mr. Jenkins's voice shook on the other end. "They're here, with bulldozers!" I rushed to the window. Yellow machines crawled up my street like monsters in the dark. My security team moved in, flashlights cutting through the night. "The HOA president authorized it," one worker said, waving what looked like official paperwork. But I'd seen enough real documents to know a forgery when I saw one. I called the police, calm voice, shaking hands. While waiting, I opened my laptop and streamed everything live. If Linda wanted to play dirty, she'd have to do it in front of the whole country. Police arrived fast. Officer Rodriguez, who'd grown up in our neighborhood, examined the paper and smirked. "This authorization's dated for next week," he said. "She didn't even check the date before forging it." I thought that was the end. I was wrong. The next morning, while my security detail switched shifts, I saw movement by the garden. Linda was standing near Mark's memorial bench, phone in her hand, talking to someone. Before I could get outside, she was gone. But what she left behind shattered me more than any bulldozer could. Mark's beautiful bench, where we used to sit and read together, lay in pieces. The bronze plaque was gone. The inscription about love and roses was scratched out. 50 years of memories destroyed. I heard a door slam. Mr. Jenkins running over with his phone recording. Linda Crawford from across the street joined us, crying when she saw the wreckage. "I got it all on camera," she said, pulling up the footage. "Linda did this herself less than an hour ago." Then she gasped, zooming in. Behind Linda's shoulder stood a man I recognized, the same developer who'd been trying to buy up the whole block for years.
They were both looking at papers, pointing at different houses on our street. My security team soon discovered 3 more hidden cameras around my property, all linked to an unknown IP address. Linda hadn't just been harassing me, she'd been studying my schedule, learning when the house was least protected. I sat in my garden, surrounded by the shattered pieces of Mark's bench, and felt something shift inside me. Linda didn't know about the hidden camera inside Mark's old birdhouse, the one I'd never had the heart to take down. She didn't know about the GPS tracker my security team had quietly placed on her car after the first threats began, or that her phone had been automatically connecting to my property's guest Wi-Fi, logging every visit. As I picked up a broken piece of marble, my phone lit up with messages from neighbors sharing their own security footage. Linda had been busy last night, posting condemned notices on every home owned by someone over 60. But she'd made a critical mistake. The notices bore the official state seal, my seal. I stared at the broken pieces of Mark's bench, remembering how he used to say, "Everything happens for a reason." Maybe he was right. Linda thought she was destroying evidence, but instead she'd handed me exactly what I needed, proof that she was impersonating state officials. That evening, as the sunset painted my roses gold, my phone buzzed again, a new alert from my security system. Linda was back. This time she wasn't alone. A full team of people in suits followed her. But when she spotted the quiet line of state police cars parked along the curb, her expression changed. That was the moment she realized what her greed had done. She hadn't just picked a fight with a senator who loved her garden. She'd declared war on someone who knew how to fight back. The next morning began with sirens, not the soft ones from my security detail, but the kind that make your stomach drop. I was sipping my coffee when 3 state police cars pulled up to Linda's house across the street. Mr. Jenkins ran over, still in his bathrobe, nearly spilling his mug. He said, "You won't believe what Linda Thompson just sent me." Holding up his phone, the HOA's financial records glowed on the screen, showing massive money transfers to offshore accounts. Linda Crawford hadn't just been stealing homes, she'd been running a full-blown criminal enterprise. I stood on my porch as she emerged, still wearing her designer pajamas and that pearl necklace she always bragged about. Even now she held her chin high, pretending she still ruled the block. The officers read her rights as she stood there, wrists cuffed, her perfect hair blowing in the morning breeze. "This is ridiculous!" she shrieked, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "Do you know who I am? I'm friends with Senator Parker." That made me chuckle. Parker had lost his seat last year after his own scandal.
Neighbors started coming out of their houses, some still in robes, others dressed for work but too curious to leave. Mrs. Johnson, from number 42, stood on her porch recording everything. Her hands trembled. Linda had tried to fine her last month for installing a wheelchair ramp. State Investigator Agent Rodriguez approached me, handing over a thick folder. 3 counties, 17 neighborhoods, over 40 homes targeted. Same pattern every time. Digital records changed, sudden eviction notices, quick sales to her company, and massive profits from flipping the properties. Senator Carter, your home wasn't the first, but it'll be the last. I flipped through the evidence. 5 years' worth of fraud. Dozens of families had lost everything. A Channel 5 news van pulled up, then another from Channel 9. Linda saw them and changed her story instantly. "Senator Carter orchestrated this whole thing," she screamed, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "She's trying to discredit me before the election. Ask her about the bribes." I stayed calm, sipping my coffee on the porch. The reporters glanced between us, at Linda being led into a police car and at me standing still. They knew who to believe. 20 years in public service had taught me one thing: the truth always comes out. Linda Thompson arrived soon after, carrying boxes of documents. She looked exhausted but proud. She'd told the officers, "I've been gathering evidence for months. Every forged record, every fake sale, every secret transfer." Linda thought no one would notice because she only targeted older residents who didn't check their online property records. More police units arrived, heading downtown to raid Linda's real estate office. Mr. Jenkins placed a hand on my shoulder. He said quietly, "Mark would be proud. Remember how he always said your stubbornness would save the day someday?" By noon, the investigation had spread like wildfire. We learned Linda's company had ties to similar scams in 2 other states. The FBI was already getting involved. My phone rang non-stop. Calls from other senators, governors, even the Attorney General himself. As the officers loaded Linda into the cruiser, her last words were about my upcoming re-election campaign. She still thought this was political. She never understood some things matter far more than power.
They were both studying documents, pointing at different houses on our street. My security team discovered 3 more hidden cameras around my property, all connected to an unknown IP address. Linda hadn't just been harassing me. She'd been studying my schedule, learning when the house was least protected. I sat in my garden, surrounded by the pieces of Mark's bench, and felt something shift inside me. Linda didn't know about the hidden camera in Mark's old birdhouse, the one I could never bring myself to take down, or about the GPS tracker my security team had discreetly placed on her car after the first threats began. Nor did she know that her phone had been automatically connecting to my property's guest Wi-Fi, logging every visit. As I picked up the broken marble pieces, my phone lit up with messages from neighbors sharing their own security footage. Linda had been busy last night, putting condemned notices on every house owned by someone over 60. But she'd made a fatal mistake. The notices used the official state seal. My seal. I looked at the shattered bench pieces, remembering how Mark always said everything happens for a reason. Maybe he was right. Linda thought she was destroying evidence. Instead, she'd given me exactly what I needed, proof that she was impersonating state officials. That evening, as I watched the sunset paint my roses gold, my phone buzzed again, an alert from my security system. Linda was back, this time with a team of people in suits. But when she saw the state police cars parked quietly along the street, her face changed. She finally realized what her greed had done. She hadn't just picked a fight with a senator who loved her garden. She'd declared war on someone who knew how to fight back. The morning began with sirens.
not my usual security detail, but the kind that meant business. I was sipping my coffee when 3 state police cars pulled up to Linda's house across the street. My neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, ran over, still in his bathrobe, nearly spilling his own coffee. "You won't believe what Linda Crawford just sent me," he said, holding up his phone. The HOA's financial records filled the screen, showing wire transfers to offshore accounts. Linda hadn't just been stealing homes, she'd been running a full-blown criminal operation. I watched from my porch as Linda emerged, still wearing her designer pajamas and that pearl necklace she loved to show off. Even then, she held her chin high, as if she still owned the neighborhood. The officers read her rights as her perfect hair blew in the morning breeze. "This is ridiculous!" she shrieked, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "Do you know who I am? I'm friends with Senator Parker." That made me chuckle. Parker had lost his seat last year in his own scandal. Neighbors began stepping out of their homes, some in bathrobes, others dressed for work, but too curious to leave. Mrs. Johnson from number 42 recorded everything, her hands trembling. Linda had threatened to fine her last month for having a wheelchair ramp that was an eyesore. State investigator Michael Torres approached me with a thick folder. 3 counties, 17 neighborhoods, over 40 homes, all the same pattern. Digital records altered, sudden eviction notices, quick sales to Linda's real estate company, and massive profits. He handed me the file. "Your home wasn't the first, Senator Carter, but it'll be the last. We found evidence going back 5 years. Some victims lost everything." News vans began arriving, Channel 5, then Channel 9. When Linda saw them, she panicked. "Senator Carter orchestrated this whole thing. She's trying to ruin me before the election. Ask her about the bribes." I stayed calm on my porch, sipping my coffee. The reporters looked from her to me, then back again. They knew who to believe. 20 years in public service taught me one thing: the truth always comes out. Linda Crawford arrived carrying boxes of documents, exhausted but proud. She'd been gathering evidence for months, she told the officers. Every fake document, every altered record, every illegal sale. Linda thought no one would notice because she targeted older residents who might not check their digital files. More police cars arrived heading to Linda's downtown office. Mr. Jenkins squeezed my shoulder. "Mark would be proud," he said softly. "Remember how he always said your stubbornness would save the day?" By noon, we learned Linda's company had ties to similar schemes in 2 other states. The FBI was now involved. My phone buzzed nonstop with calls from other senators and even the Attorney General. Linda's last words before the car door slammed were about my upcoming re-election. She thought this was all political. She never understood that some things matter more, like home, community, and doing what's right.